This is the Nothing Phone 2, and while it doesn't have the best specs, it's definitely a compelling alternative to Apple's iPhone 14 and iPhone 14 Plus. Welcome everybody to Apple Insider. It is Andrew here, and I really like the Nothing Phone. It's got a lot of stuff going for it that makes it honestly one of the most exciting phones, at least for me, outside of the iPhone in a number of years. The clearest competitors to the Nothing Phone 2 is Apple's iPhone 14 and iPhone 14 Plus. So that's what I'm going to compare it to in this video. I'm going to break it down between the design, the performance, and the specs, as well as the cameras. So let's go ahead and dive into this. Of course, we first have to start with the design and the back of the Nothing Phone 2. It looks amazing. I love this translucent design where you can see all of the bits and pieces inside of the phone. You can see the camera modules being connected, you can see the ribbon cables, you can see the charging coils, just all of this tech inside this glass clear back, and it's incredibly cool. You can see we have our two camera modules there on the back, an ultra-wide lens and a wide-angle lens, same as on the iPhone. If we turn around to the front, you can see we have a very nice display, fairly slim bezels, and it's an always-on display. And at the bottom you see that circle, that is a fingerprint reader, but it also has facial recognition, so you have a few different options for getting in. The iPhone, of course, on the other hand, does have FaceID, so that's how you can authenticate. There is no in-screen fingerprint reader. The display on the Nothing Phone 2 is a 6.7-inch display, which fits in well with the 6.1-inch iPhone 14 and the 6.7-inch iPhone 14 Plus. The Nothing Phone wins out in some ways, and the iPhone wins out in others when it comes to the displays. The Nothing Phone 2 has a much brighter display, it can get all up to 1,000 nits. It also has a variable refresh rate from 1 Hz all the way up to 120, so basically kind of a ProMotion display, a feature that the iPhones don't have. But the iPhones do have a higher pixel density. The iPhone 14 has a pixel density of 460 ppi, while the iPhone 14 Plus is 458, where the Nothing Phone 2 sits at a paltry 394. Shouldn't have to mention it too much, but Apple does support Lightning as well as MagSafe for wireless charging. The Nothing Phone 2 supports wireless charging as well as USB-C. Moving on to the performance and power behind these phones. Both of them honestly kind of cheaped out a little bit in terms of the processors that are running these devices. Apple has included the A15 Bionic processor, though it could have included the A16 Bionic processor that is found in the iPhone 14 Pro and iPhone 14 Pro Max. So it went with kind of like last year's processors in the entry-level 14 and 14 Plus. And Nothing kind of did the same thing. Nothing is running the Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Plus, but it's only Gen 1 and not Gen 2. There's a Gen 2 out that is much more capable, and they didn't opt to include it in this phone. But really, I think Nothing is more focused on the design and overall user experience of this phone and not pushing like the highest end specs. This isn't, a $1,000 plus smartphone. It's much more kind of mid to entry level, and I think for what they have here, that's perfectly fine. Let's go ahead and look at some benchmarks for this. Inside of Geekbench 6, the iPhone 14 with its A15 Bionic processor scored a 2,264 on the single core and a 5651 on the multi-core. The Nothing Phone 2 scored only a 1757 on that single core and correspondingly a 4513 on the multi-core. Apple creates its own chips here, so it should be no surprise that they're continuously able to clobber the competition in terms of performance. Sure, benchmarks aren't the end-all be-all, but it's pretty obvious that Apple's in-house designed chips are incredibly powerful and, once more, are faster and more capable than the competition. If we look at the Geekbench 6 ML for machine learning, Apple once again crushes it with a 926 versus only a 545, nearly double the machine learning score from the Nothing Phone 2 to the iPhone 14s. That said, using these phones, I don't notice much of a difference, stutter, lag, anything over there on the Nothing Phone 2. I've tried to use it as much as possible as kind of like a daily driver, even if I don't have my SIM card installed it, because I'm not dealing with the whole digital SIM card issue or an eSIM issue. But actually using it, looking stuff on, browsing, watching videos, everything feels very fluid. They've done an excellent job of maximizing that processor as much as possible. If you start to get into anything really fancy, trying to do anything hard with videos or photo, I can see some issues popping up, but for the most part, this phone very much flies, as does the iPhone 14. But what about the cameras? The iPhone 14 still has a 12 megapixel ultra-wide lens and a 12 megapixel wide-angle lens. Nothing, on the other hand, has opted for a 50 megapixel ultra-wide lens and a 50 megapixel wide-angle lens. Let's go ahead and look at a few comparison shots and see how these actually stack up. One thing that's really nice is for the standard shots using those wide-angle lens at like 1x zoom, they both look pretty darn similar. There's not a huge difference between the two. But once you start looking at maybe 2x zoom, which is digital zoom, the Nothing Phone 2 already starts to look better. If we max things out on the iPhone to 5x digital zoom, comparing both at that 5x optical or digital zoom length, I really think that Nothing Phone 2 is starting to push itself even further, looking a lot better when you're zooming in. And when you max out the Nothing Phone 2, it doesn't look as good when we're looking at 10x digital zoom, but it still looks better than the iPhone would if Apple even offered this feature. I think what Nothing did here is really smart, because you're able to stick with just two cameras, and ultra wide and a wide, but you're able to offer basically almost lossless 2x digital zoom. It looks fantastic compared to the digital zoom offered on the iPhone, and you can get all the way up to 10x digital zoom directly in that stock app. I really like it, but they're still sticking with those two lenses. So depending on how much you like the post-processing, I think the Nothing Phone 2 here is winning very much so. Looking at video capabilities, the iPhone 14 is able to shoot 4K video with Dolby Vision. The Nothing Phone 2 is also able to shoot 4K video, both at 60 frames per second. But one distinction here is that the Nothing Phone 2 can shoot slow-mo footage all the way up to 480 frames per second, whereas the iPhone can only shoot at 240 frames per second. So twice the frames are captured on the Nothing Phone 2 when you're shooting in slow motion. On the fronts of the phones, we have a 32 megapixel camera on the Nothing Phone 2, and Apple's front-facing camera is only 12 megapixels. It's really easy to say just the iPhones are better and you'll be happier with them. They have iOS, they're more powerful, and they're extremely capable devices with an incredibly robust app store. But at the same time, not everyone's going to be happy with the iPhones, and these things start off at $599 for the smaller screen size, and it's an extra $100 if you want to go up to the 6.7-inch 14 Plus. The Nothing Phone 2 starts at $200 less and gives you that larger screen. Plus, one of the features that I didn't even touch on until now is super unique, and that's this back panel that is full of what Nothing is called Glyphs. They're actually little lights that can do all sorts of things. They can give you your battery charging status. So when this is sitting down, you can actually see visually how much charge is remaining on your phone. You can see when someone is calling you, and you can create custom glyph animations so you can differentiate between maybe your partner and your parents. All that you can do with these lights on the back, and I think it's incredibly cool. It's such a neat, unique feature. Taking advantage of that clear part, you don't even notice that they're really light, so like when you're looking at them, it just looks kind of like the design, the internal components of a phone, but they actually light up. You can have a timer countdown, all these things. It's a neat feature. So we're talking $200 less, a unique feature built in, really nice cameras, and a larger screen size. Look, I'm going to push iOS on anyone because I love the operating system. I think that makes most of the user experience, but Nothing has done a superb job here. I love the multiple options between facial recognition and fingerprint. I love even the Nothing OS looks super cool, the pixelated look. It starts to fall apart sometimes because there are random apps that aren't skinned properly, like Geekbench ML and random Google applications, but come on. This is a cool phone, and Nothing is at least doing something unique. They care about the user experience, I think, far more than a lot of the competition does. Let me know what you guys think. Will you consider the Nothing Phone 2, or are you sticking with iOS? Let me know down below in the comments or on Twitter at Andrew_OSU, or find me on Threads at AndrewO'Hara941. Otherwise, stay tuned. We got a lot more videos coming your way.